Imagine opening YouTube and seeing the perfect family. 6 kids with bright smiles, a mother brimming with confidence, a home that radiates order and love. Every detail is curated, every moment preserved. Millions of people tune in daily to watch them laugh, learn, and grow. To many, Ruby Franke wasn't just a mom, she was a guide, a model for how parenting should be done. But what happens when a family you trust most is hiding a truth too dark to imagine? For years, Ruby Franke's 8 Passengers channel was celebrated as wholesome entertainment. But hidden inside those vlogs were cracks, clips that made viewers uneasy, punishments that felt more like cruelty than discipline. Some sounded the alarm, others looked away. And all the while, Ruby's children were living a nightmare that no one on outside could see clearly. This isn't just a story of one influencer who fell from grace. It's a story about deception, manipulation, and how an online empire was built on the suffering of children. It's a story about how platforms, sponsors, and even audiences ignored red flags because it was easier to believe in the illusion of a perfect family. And it's a story about the courage of a single child who risked everything to escape and finally expose the truth. Tonight, we uncover the rise and fall of Ruby Franke, from the beginning of 8 Passengers to the shocking arrest that shocked the world, and the lesson society cannot afford to ignore. The rise of 8 Passengers. When Ruby Franke first hit upload in 2015, she probably didn't imagine that within a few years her family's life would be playing out in front of millions of strangers. Back then, family vlogging was booming. YouTube had become the new American living room. Instead of turning on sitcoms, people tuned into everyday families who invited them into their homes, offering glimpses of breakfast, playtime, school drop-offs, and bedtime routines. The appeal was simple. It was real life, only neater, cleaner, and more entertaining. Ruby and her husband Kevin fit perfectly into this mold. Members of the Mormon faith, parents to 6 children, they had the wholesome image that advertisers and audiences alike loved. Their channel, 8 Passengers, branded itself as a story of a big, tight-knit family navigating modern life with traditional values. From the beginning, it was clear that Ruby wasn't just recording memories. She was packaging a lifestyle. The early videos showed family road trips, birthday parties, school projects, and the small rituals of daily life. Audiences felt like they knew the Frankes personally. Ruby's narration was confident, sometimes stern, but always wrapped in the language of love and guidance. Her husband Kevin often appeared as the quieter counterpart, a stabilizing presence, while Ruby took the spotlight. The children were the stars, their faces beaming across thumbnails that promised viewers a taste of family joy. And people clicked. The channel grew steadily, crossing 100,000 subscribers, then 500,000, then over 2 million. By 2019, 8 Passengers was one of the most popular family channels on the platform. Videos pulled in hundreds of thousands of views, sometimes millions. Sponsorships rolled in. Clothing brands, meal kits, household products. Companies were eager to put their names alongside the smiling Franke family. Ruby quickly became more than just a mom with a camera. She was an influencer, a parenting coach in the eyes of many viewers. Her strict style, setting boundaries, delivering consequences, stood out in a world of soft parenting trends. Some mothers admired her firmness, saying she gave them permission to be tough on their own kids. Others winced, uneasy with her tone and punishments. But love her or hate her, people kept watching. And that was the key, attention. On YouTube, attention is currency. The algorithm rewards engagement likes, comments, even outrage. If a clip stirred debate, it spread further. Ruby seemed to understand this, whether consciously or instinctively. She leaned into the persona of the no-nonsense mom, who didn't care if you judged her. That defiance became part of her brand. But from the start, there were moments that made some viewers uneasy. Moments that, in hindsight, looked less like parenting and more like foreshadowing. One infamous example was when Ruby admitted on camera that she had taken away her son's bedroom for months. As punishment for misbehavior, she said, he was made to sleep on a beanbag chair in an empty room. Ruby explained this calmly, with the same tone she might use to describe what she made for dinner. To her, it was discipline. To critics, it was cruel. Comment section Some fans offended her. Children need to learn consequences. Others recoiled. This is abuse, plain and simple. Another incident came when one of her children forgot to bring their lunch to school. Many parents would sigh, pack something quickly, and drop it off. But Ruby proudly told viewers she refused to bring the forgotten lunch, saying her child would learn from hunger. She framed it as a teaching moment. The internet, once again, was divided. Some saw it as tough love. Others saw it as neglect. Imagine being that child, sitting in a cafeteria surrounded by peers eating sandwiches and pizza, while your stomach growled, all because your hunger had been turned into a lesson. These weren't rare occurrences. They popped up again and again. Children filmed crying on camera. Confessions of strict punishments delivered with a smile. Ruby insisted this was good parenting, that she was teaching resilience and accountability, and her loyal fans cheered her on. They filled the comments with praise, telling her she was brave to parent in a world that had gone soft. But critics noticed something else: the children's expressions. Watch closely, they said, and you can see the discomfort, the way a child's smile fades when Ruby talks about discipline, the way they avoid eye contact, go quiet, shrink into themselves. These were subtle cues, easy to dismiss, but chilling in hindsight. The camera caught them, but millions ignored them. It's important to remember that during these years, 8 Passengers wasn't a small channel on the fringe of YouTube. It was mainstream. It was celebrated. Ruby was interviewed, featured, praised. The money was flowing in, and with it, validation. Every controversial video that stirred outrage also boosted her visibility. The very punishments people criticized became part of her notoriety, and part of her success. This is where the story begins to feel eerily familiar when compared to other true crime cases. Think of Chris Watts, the man who appeared in family photos smiling with his daughters, only to later murder them. Think of Josh Powell, the father who gave media interviews about his missing wife, all while hiding terrible secrets. In each of these stories, there's a tension between the public image and the private reality. We want to believe the image. We cling to it, because admitting the truth that harm can live inside the perfect family picture is too uncomfortable. The rise of 8 Passengers is not just a story of a family getting famous online. It's the story of how millions of viewers, sponsors, and even the platform itself ignored warning signs because illusion was easier to accept. Ruby Franke built her empire on the backs of her children, turning their daily lives into monetized content. And when cracks appeared, we looked away. In retrospect, the early years of 8 Passengers read like a cautionary tale. The fame came quickly, the money came quickly, and with it came a culture of validation that drowned out criticism. The more Ruby doubled down on harsh parenting, the more her fans applauded her. The more she ignored the critics, the more powerful she seemed. And all the while, her children were growing up under the weight of that camera. Their pain broadcast as lessons, their struggles packaged as entertainment. For Ruby, the rise of 8 Passengers must have felt like success. For her children, it was the beginning of a nightmare. The red flags everyone missed. From the outside, Ruby Franke's channel looked like a success story. A mother of 6, raising her family with discipline and love, all while managing to document it for millions of adoring fans. But as her subscriber count climbed, something else was happening too, a growing unease. The people who watched closely began to notice things that didn't sit right. Little cracks in the perfect facade, uncomfortable moments left in the edit, the kinds of moments that make you shift in your seat, that whisper at the back of your mind, something isn't right here. The earliest signs came in the form of punishments that Ruby described proudly, almost defiantly. One of the most infamous involved her son losing his bedroom. Ruby explained on camera that as a consequence for bad behavior, she had stripped him of his bed and belongings and made him sleep on a beanbag chair in a bare room. She presented it as if it were a clever parenting strategy. No yelling, no spanking, just consequences. But for many viewers, it felt wrong. It felt cruel. And the fact that Ruby chose to share it, to broadcast her son's humiliation to millions, made it feel worse. Then came the lunch incident. One of Ruby's children forgot their lunch at school. In many households, a parent would sigh, pack something quickly, and drop it off. But Ruby told her audience she refused to bring food. She said her child would learn from hunger. The way she explained it, smiling into the camera, made it seem as though she was sharing a helpful parenting tip. But think about what that really means. A child sitting in a cafeteria, watching everyone else eat while their stomach growled, not because of poverty, not because of circumstance, but because their mother decided hunger was a lesson. Viewers argued about it endlessly. Some defended Ruby, praising her toughness. Others were horrified, and there were more. Christmas presents withheld, children filmed crying, their tears used as thumbnails, casual mentions of punishments that seemed excessive for the misdeeds. Each incident on its own might have been written off as strict parenting, but together, they painted a troubling picture. And the fact that Ruby chose to document these moments, to monetize them, suggested she saw nothing wrong at all. Critics began to organize. On Reddit, entire communities sprang up dedicated to analyzing 8 passengers. People cataloged every troubling moment, every red flag. They debated whether Ruby's parenting crossed the line into abuse. They wrote petitions, urging Child Protective Services to investigate. One petition gathered tens of thousands of signatures. Comment sections filled with pleas. Somebody needs to help those kids. But nothing happened. YouTube didn't intervene. Sponsors stayed quiet. Authorities didn't act. And so Ruby kept filming. The red flags kept piling up, and the audience kept watching. Why? That's the question that haunts this story. Why did so many people see these warning signs and do nothing? The answer lies partly in parasocial relationships, those one-sided bonds we form with people we see on our screens. Ruby's fans felt like they knew her. They saw her every day, in her home, with her children. They trusted her. So when she described punishments that sounded harsh, they gave her the benefit of the doubt. They assumed she knew best. There's also the psychology of authority. Ruby spoke with certainty. She didn't present her ideas as suggestions. She declared them as truths. And when someone speaks with conviction, we tend to believe them, even if what they're saying makes us uneasy. Viewers who might have doubted their own parenting skills found comfort in Ruby's firmness. She made them feel validated, even empowered, to be stricter with their own children. And then there was the algorithm. On YouTube, outrage is fuel. Controversial clips spread faster, get more engagement, keep people watching. Every time Ruby's punishment sparked debate, her visibility grew. The very things that should have raised alarms ended up making her more successful. It's a dangerous cycle. The harsher she was, the more people watched. The more people watched, the more validated she felt. Looking back, it's hard not to compare Ruby's case to other tragedies where red flags were ignored. The Turpin family in California, where 13 children were held captive by their parents. Neighbors noticed strange things. Teachers reported odd behaviors. But nothing was done until one child escaped. Or Chris Watts, who smiled in family photos and gave interviews about his missing wife, even as he hid the truth. In each case, there were signs. And in each case, people chose to believe the image instead of the reality. That's what makes Ruby Franke's story so chilling. The red flags weren't hidden. They weren't whispered behind closed doors. They were filmed, edited, and uploaded for the world to see. Millions of us watched them. Millions of us saw children punished in ways that felt wrong. Millions of us heard Ruby describe cruelty as lessons. And still, she thrived. It forces us to ask hard questions. Why did we ignore the discomfort? Why did sponsors keep working with her? Why didn't platforms act sooner? Maybe it's because the truth was too hard to face. Because admitting the reality would mean admitting we had been complicit, that we had clicked, watched, even enjoyed content that documented suffering. The red flags in Ruby's case weren't subtle. They were loud, clear, and consistent. And yet, they were dismissed until it was too late. Until a child ran barefoot into the street, begging for food and water. Until the police found injuries, restraints, and malnourishment. Until the facade could no longer hold. Ruby's story isn't just about what happened inside her home. It's about what happened outside in the comments, on the platforms, in the silence of those who looked away. Because abuse doesn't thrive in isolation. It thrives in the gaps between what we see and what we choose to believe. And in the case of Ruby Franke, those gaps swallowed years of warning signs. The influence of Jodi Hildebrandt. If Ruby Franke was the face of 8 passengers, then Jodi Hildebrandt was a shadow behind the curtain, a hidden hand that pushed Ruby from strict parenting into something far darker. To understand Ruby's downfall, we have to understand Jodi's role. Because while Ruby carried the camera, it was Jodi who sharpened philosophy that justified cruelty and transformed discipline into abuse. Jodi Hildebrandt was not an ordinary friend. She had been a licensed counselor in Utah, running programs under the name Connections. On paper, her mission was about healing and self-improvement, helping people take accountability, confront their flaws, and build stronger families. But in practice, many clients described something very different. They spoke about rigid rules, emotional manipulation, and teachings that felt more like indoctrination than therapy. Over the years, Jodi faced complaints about her harsh methods and, in some cases, disciplinary actions from licensing boards. She was known for her uncompromising views, especially around sin, control, and obedience. When Ruby met Jodi, she wasn't just meeting a counselor. She was meeting a mentor who would validate and intensify her strictest instincts. Ruby had always been a disciplinarian, but under Jodi's influence, her philosophy shifted from parenting to something resembling ideology. Jodi gave Ruby language to frame punishment as moral correction, deprivation as love, and suffering as growth. Suddenly, Ruby wasn't just enforcing consequences, she was fulfilling what she saw as a higher calling. The two women began working together publicly. They launched content under the Connections brand, YouTube videos, courses, and seminars. In these videos, Ruby sat beside Jodi, echoing her words, nodding in agreement, reinforcing her ideas. Their tone was calm, confident, and absolute. They spoke about truth as though they possessed it exclusively. To the uncritical listener, it sounded authoritative. To the wary observer, it sounded dangerous. In one video, Ruby and Jodi spoke about how children must be stripped of comforts to learn humility. They dismissed expressions of suffering as manipulation. They described independence not as a healthy stage of growth, but as rebellion. They framed obedience as the highest good, and any resistance as proof of selfishness or entitlement. The logic was circular, airtight, once you accepted their premise. Any pushback became evidence of guilt. It was a worldview that left no room for dissent. Psychologists have a word for this: thought reform. It's the same kind of framework used in cults and coercive groups. First, you define the rules of truth. Then, you label anyone who disagrees as broken, lost, or evil. Finally, you justify control, punishment, even cruelty as a form of salvation. That's what Jodi provided Ruby, a system that made her harshest parenting not just acceptable, but righteous. And Ruby embraced it. Her language shifted. Her punishments became harsher, more creative, more detached from compassion. She began talking about her children not as individuals with needs, but as subjects who had to be broken down and rebuilt. If a child was hungry, it wasn't neglect, it was a lesson in humility. If a child was deprived of comfort, it wasn't cruelty, it was character building. Ruby had found in Jodi a partner who not only agreed with her instincts, but elevated them into doctrine. The dynamic between Ruby and Jodi mirrored patterns we've seen in other disturbing cases. Think of Lori Vallow and Chad Daybell, where two people fed each other's delusions until tragedy followed. Think of cult leaders like Jim Jones or Charles Manson, who cloaked abuse in the language of higher truth. The details differ, but the psychology is similar. When someone finds a partner who validates their extremes, their limits vanish. They feel emboldened, justified, unstoppable. Neighbors and family members noticed changes in Ruby during this time. She became more isolated, more defensive, more committed to Jodi's teachings. Some reports suggest her marriage suffered, that Kevin distanced himself as Jodi's influence deepened. Ruby cut off relatives who questioned her choices, dismissing them as toxic or unworthy of her new truth. Isolation is another hallmark of manipulation. By cutting away dissent, Jodi ensured she was Ruby's primary voice, her strongest influence. It's telling that when the abuse finally came to light, It was at Jodi Hildebrandt house. That's where Ruby's children were discovered, malnourished and injured, one of them brave enough to escape and seek help. They weren't hidden in Ruby's own home, they were hidden in Jodi's. That fact underscores how intertwined their lives had become, how deeply Ruby had surrendered to Jodi's worldview. Looking back, it's almost chilling to watch their joint videos now. The calm smiles, the confident voices, the certainty with which they dismissed suffering. It's a reminder that danger doesn't always shout. Sometimes it whispers, dressed in authority, cloaked in calm tones, wrapped in a language of love and discipline. That's why it's so dangerous, because it doesn't look dangerous at first. It looks like guidance. It looks like certainty. It looks like help. And yet, behind that calm certainty was a philosophy that turned children into objects of correction rather than beings worthy of compassion. Ruby believed she was saving her children. Jodi convinced her that pain was love, that deprivation was teaching, that obedience was salvation. Together, they built a reality where abuse wasn't abuse at all. It was truth. This partnership is what makes the Ruby Franke case different from many other family vloggers who've been criticized for exploiting their kids. It wasn't just about views or money. It was about ideology. Ruby wasn't only chasing fame or profit. She was chasing philosophy that made her feel justified, righteous, even holy. And Jodi was the architect of that philosophy. The legal system will eventually sort out Ruby's and Jodi's fates, but no courtroom can erase the damage of that influence. The children who lived under this philosophy will carry its scars. And for the rest of us, the lesson is chillingly clear. Be wary of those who disguise control as guidance, who preach certainty without compassion, who tell you that pain is love. Because behind that mask, there's almost always harm. The arrest. On August 30th, 2023, the image of Ruby Franke as a YouTube mom, parenting coach, an example of discipline came crashing down in the most dramatic way possible. For years, critics had said something was wrong. For years, neighbors had whispered. For years, petitions had begged authorities to act. And yet nothing changed until one of Ruby's children made a decision so brave that would unravel the entire facade of 8 passengers. It began in Ivins, Utah, at the home of Ruby's closest confidant, Jodi Hildebrandt. The children weren't with Ruby in her own house. They had been moved into Jodi's orbit, where Ruby and Jodi shared custody of not just philosophy, but daily control. That afternoon, one of Ruby's sons escaped. His body told the story before he even opened his mouth. Thin, frail, his skin marred by wounds and impressions of plastic ties. He was barefoot, dehydrated, and desperate. Imagine that moment, this young boy, who had grown up in front of millions of viewers as a smiling, energetic child, now running to the neighborhood like a prisoner breaking free. He found a neighbor, knocked on the door, and asked for food and water.
Yes.
Hi, I was just wondering if you could do 2 favors.
Well, what are they?
Taking me to the nearest police station. Well, actually, just one's fine.
What's going on, son? Have a seat there.
It's personal business.
Have a seat. What's your name? I just had a 12-year-old boy show up here at my front door asking for help. And he's said he just came from a neighbor's house. He's emaciated. He's got tape around his legs. He's hungry and he's thirsty.
Need someone immediately.
But he has duct tape around his
Injuries. There's sores around them.
Yeah, there's sores around him. I think there's a good chance he's been...
He also has...
Oh, and he has it around his ankle.
As well.
I mean, his wrist as well. Okay, this boy has been...
Needs immediate attention. Oh, you were such a good kid.
This kid is probably sleeping. I think he's sleeping. So he escaped.
We need the police here now.
They're on their way.
These are some monitoring. I gave
These folks are going to examine you.
The neighbor, stunned, looked at him and realized instantly that something was terribly wrong. The boy's wrists and ankles bore the marks of restraints. It was immediately obvious he had endured severe neglect and had not been cared for properly in a long time. The neighbor did what anyone would hope to do in that situation. They called 911. The dispatcher's voice was steady, but the urgency was unmistakable. The caller described the boy's condition: thin, wounded, tide marks visible, begging for help. That call, recorded and logged, would later become one of the most haunting pieces of evidence in the case. Police rushed to Jodi Hildebrandt home. What they found inside confirmed the worst fears. Another child was there, malnourished, dehydrated, with injuries consistent with prolonged abuse. The condition shocked even seasoned officers. This wasn't strict parenting. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was a crime scene. Both children were immediately taken to hospital, where doctors confirmed the severity of their conditions. Reports described wounds from restraints, deep malnutrition, dehydration, and evidence of extended neglect. These weren't accidental injuries. These weren't one-off mistakes. They were the product of systemic cruelty. Ruby Franke was arrested that same day, along with Jodi Hildebrandt. Mugshots replaced the smiling thumbnails of 8 passengers. Headlines screamed across the country. Family vlogger Ruby Franke arrested on felony child abuse charges. The contrast between the Ruby fans thought they knew and the reality captured in those booking photos was almost too much to process. The arrest ignited a media firestorm. Within hours, the story was trending on every platform. Clips of Ruby's old videos resurfaced, now viewed with new eyes. The punishment she had once proudly described the beanbag chair, the missed lunches, the tears on camera suddenly seemed less like quirky parenting choices and more like evidence. Critics who had long warned about Ruby felt vindicated, but the feeling came with no joy. Their worst fears had been confirmed, and children had suffered in the meantime. As the details came out, the public struggled to reconcile the contradiction. How could a mother who had built her life around the idea of family betray her children so completely? How could a woman who once counseled millions on parenting be accused of such horrific acts? The betrayal was profound, not just for her children, but for the community that had once trusted her. The moment of Ruby's arrest echoes other infamous cases. Think of the Turpin children, who escaped their California home after years of captivity. Think of Chris Watts, whose smiling family photos turned into crime scene evidence. In each case, the truth burst into the open in one dramatic moment: a child's escape, a confession, a neighbor's phone call. And in each case, the contrast between the public image and the private reality was staggering. But perhaps the most haunting part of this story is the courage it took for that child to run. Malnourished, injured, terrified, he had every reason to stay silent, every reason to believe escape was impossible. And yet, he chose to risk everything, to step out of the controlled world Ruby and Jodi had built, and to ask for help. In doing so, he not only saved himself, but his siblings as well. His act of bravery forced the world to confront what had been ignored for far too long. For Ruby, the arrest was the end of her public image. The sponsorships, the praise, the loyal fans all gone in an instant. For her children, it was the beginning of something else, the long, painful process of healing. And for the rest of us, it was a reminder of how easily appearances can deceive, how fragile trust can be, and how important it is to listen to the quiet signals that something isn't right. The day Ruby Franke was arrested was the day the truth finally broke free. But the truth had been there all along, hiding in plain sight, waiting for someone to act. Fallout and community reaction. When news of Ruby Franke's arrest broke, it didn't just ripple across Utah. It exploded across the entire internet. In a matter of hours, the smiling thumbnails and choreographed family vlogs of 8 passengers became artifacts in a crime story that horrified the world. People who had once admired Ruby felt betrayed. People who had long criticized her felt a grim sense of vindication. And those who had never heard of her before found themselves sucked into one of the most shocking influencer scandals of the decade. The immediate fallout was a tidal wave of reactions online. Social media became the courtroom of public opinion, with millions of voices weighing in. On Twitter, hashtags like hashtag Ruby Franke, hashtag 8Passengers, and hashtag Justice for the Kids began trending almost immediately. TikTok filled with clips dissecting Ruby's old videos, analyzing them frame by frame like pieces of evidence. YouTube commentary channels released emergency uploads with titles like, "I always knew something was off," or "The dark side of family vlogging exposed." It was a digital feeding frenzy, but at the center it was a very real tragedy. For Ruby's critics, the arrest confirmed what they had been saying for years. On Reddit forums, users resurfaced old threads where they had documented her harsh punishments. They posted screenshots of comments they had left on videos years earlier, begging someone to step in. They reminded the world of petitions that had circulated, some gathering tens of thousands of signatures, calling for child protection agencies to investigate. The haunting realization was that the red flags had been visible for years, and yet action had come only after a child literally ran for his life. For Ruby's fans, the betrayal cut deep. Many had defended her against criticism, insisting she was simply a strict mother misunderstood by outsiders. Some had even modeled their own parenting after her advice, to discover that behind the scenes, her children were allegedly being restrained, starved, and injured was devastating. Former fans took to comment sections and forums to express guilt, anger, and shame. One common refrain was, "How did I not see it? How could I have supported this?" The broader YouTube community was rocked as well. Family vloggers have been controversial for years, criticized for exploiting children and turning private lives into public content. But Ruby's arrest made those criticisms impossible to ignore. Creators began asking whether family vlogging should exist at all. They pointed out that unlike child actors, kids and family vlogs have no legal protections, no guaranteed share of the income, and no privacy. They live their lives under the constant gaze of a camera, unable to consent to the exposure. Ruby Franke's case became Exhibit A in the argument that the family vlogging industry is fundamentally unsafe. Sponsors and advertisers reacted quickly. Companies that had once partnered with 8Passengers rushed to distance themselves. Ruby's image was scrubbed from marketing materials. No brand wanted to be associated with a woman facing felony child abuse charges. In the influencer world, reputation is everything, and Ruby's had disintegrated overnight. What had taken years to build collapsed in a single day. The fallout wasn't just digital. In Utah, Ruby's arrest shook her local community, particularly within the Mormon faith. For many, Ruby had embodied traditional values, discipline, family unity, moral structure. Her downfall was not just a personal scandal, but a communal embarrassment. Church members whispered about how such behavior could have flourished under their watch. Leaders issued careful, restrained statements, distancing themselves from Ruby without explicitly condemning her. For a community that places a high value on appearances, the exposure of such darkness was especially painful. Ruby's extended family also spoke out. Her husband, Kevin, who had reportedly been living separately from her, issued statements focusing on the children's healing. Ruby's siblings gave interviews expressing shock and sadness. Some revealed they had raised concerns before, but Ruby had grown distant, dismissive, even hostile when questioned. They described how Jodi Hildebrandt's influence had isolated Ruby from her loved ones, cutting her off from dissenting voices. Their words painted a picture of a family that saw the warning signs but felt powerless to intervene. Media coverage was relentless. News outlets from CNN to local Utah stations ran continuous updates. Court hearings were dissected on morning shows. Journalists descended on Ivans, interviewing neighbors, gathering background on Jodi Hildebrandt, and digging through Ruby's old videos. It became more than a crime story. It was a cultural conversation about parenting, influence, and the dark side of internet fame. Parallels to other high-profile cases poured in. Commentators compared Ruby's children to the Turpin siblings, whose escape from captivity revealed years of hidden abuse. Others drew comparisons to Chris Watts, highlighting the eerie similarity between the smiling family images presented online and the horror concealed behind them. Each comparison reinforced the same unsettling message. Appearances can't be trusted. A perfect family photo, a cheerful vlog, a smiling influencer, none of these guarantee safety or truth. But perhaps the most profound fallout was not digital, not corporate, not communal, but personal. At the heart of this story were 6 children who had lived their lives under a camera lens, their childhoods packaged as content. They were now thrust into protective care, receiving medical attention and therapy. Details were scarce, and rightly so, to protect their privacy, but what was clear is that their healing would take years, perhaps a lifetime. The world might move on to the next scandal, but for them, the trauma was permanent. The Ruby Franke case also reignited debates about the role of platforms like YouTube. Why had so many of her controversial videos remained online for so long? Why had petitions and complaints not led to action? Why had content that showed questionable parenting practices been monetized and promoted by algorithms? Critics argued that platforms profit from content without assuming responsibility for its impact. Ruby's arrest made those questions impossible to ignore. In the end, the community reaction to Ruby Franke's arrest was a mixture of outrage, sorrow, guilt, and reflection. Outrage that children had been harmed, sorrow for the victims, guilt from those who had supported her, reflection from viewers, creators, and society at large about the systems that allowed this to happen. Ruby's fall from grace wasn't just a collapse of one influencer's career. It was a collapse of an illusion. The illusion that a smiling family on YouTube can be taken at face value. The illusion that views and subscribers are signs of virtue. The illusion that strict parenting is always rooted in love. Those illusions shattered on August 30th, 2023, and the fallout left scars far beyond Ruby's immediate family. The trial and what comes next. The arrest of Ruby Franke and Jodi Hildebrandt was only the beginning. After the mugshots, after the headlines, after the initial wave of outrage, the slow machinery of the legal system began to turn. And in many ways, this stage, the trial and its aftermath, may be even more important than the arrest itself. Because while the arrest revealed the truth, the trial will determine what justice, if any, will look like. The charges. Ruby Franke faced multiple counts of aggravated child abuse, each one a felony. In Utah, these charges are not minor. Each count can carry a sentence of up to 15 years in prison. Multiply that by 6, and you start to see the scope of what she was facing, the possibility of spending the rest of her life behind bars. Prosecutors laid out their case methodically. They had medical evidence from the hospital visits. They had testimony from officers who responded to the 911 call. They had the physical signs of restraint, the reports of malnourishment, the wounds that could not be explained away as discipline. Jodi Hildebrandt faced the same charges. For her, the case was even more damning. She wasn't the children's mother. She had no legal or moral claim to their care. And yet, it was in her house that the children were found in their dire state. Prosecutors argued that Jodi's role was central not just as an accomplice, but as an architect of the abuse. The defense. Ruby's defense team faced an almost impossible task. How do you explain away evidence of children found starving and injured? How do you justify zip-tie marks, open wounds, and dehydration? One potential strategy was to argue that Ruby herself was under the psychological control of Jodi Hildebrandt, that Ruby, though a mother, had been manipulated into believing this treatment was necessary, even righteous. It's not an unheard of defense. Courts have seen cases where defendants argue that they acted under coercion, manipulation, or cult-like influence. But even if that narrative gained traction, it would not erase Ruby's responsibility as a parent. Judges and juries are rarely sympathetic to mothers who fail to protect their children. The law holds parents to the highest standard of duty. And in Ruby's case, the gap between that duty and her actions was wide. The courtroom. As hearings began, the media presence was overwhelming. Every appearance Ruby made in court was covered by cameras and reporters. The public wanted to see her no longer the confident mother of 8 passengers, but a defendant in shackles and an orange jumpsuit. Each time she walked into courtroom, the image was broadcast across the nation, and each time, viewers struggled to reconcile the woman they saw with the one they remembered from YouTube. Inside the courtroom, the proceedings were sober. Judges reviewed evidence. Lawyers debated motions. At times, the children's welfare was discussed, though their identities and details were shielded to protect them. The process was slow, deliberate, frustrating even. But that's the nature of trials. While the public craves swift justice, the system grinds forward step by step. The children's role. One of the most painful questions was whether Ruby's children would testify. On one hand, their voices were central to understanding the abuse. On the other, putting them on the stand risked re-traumatizing them. Prosecutors weighed these factors carefully, knowing that the children's testimony could be powerful but also deeply harmful. In many cases like this, prosecutors rely more heavily on medical reports, expert testimony, and physical evidence to avoid forcing children to relive their trauma publicly. The bigger picture. The trial wasn't just about Ruby and Jodi. It became a stage for bigger questions about the family vlogging industry, about online influence, about the responsibilities of platforms like YouTube. Lawmakers began discussing whether new protections were needed for children featured in monetized content. Activists pushed for regulations similar to those that exist for child actors, ensuring that kids are paid for their work and shielded from exploitation. Legal experts debated whether Ruby's case could set a precedent. Could prosecutors argue that monetizing children's suffering constituted an aggravating factor in sentencing? Could platforms be pressured into greater accountability for the content they host? The answers weren't clear, but the questions themselves were significant. Possible outcomes. As the trial loomed, several outcomes were possible. Ruby and Jodi could take plea deals, admitting guilt in exchange for lighter sentences. They could go to trial and risk decades in prison. They could even attempt to turn on each other, each blaming the other for the abuse. For Ruby, portrayed herself as a victim of Jodi's influence might win some sympathy, but it would not absolve her. For Jodi, the strategy was less clear. Her role was too central, her influence too obvious. No matter the outcome, one thing was certain. The children's lives would never be the same. Even if Ruby and Jodi were sentenced to the maximum terms, the damage had already been done. The scars, physical, emotional, psychological, would remain. Public anticipation. The public waited for the trial the way people once waited for the O.J. Simpson verdict or the Casey Anthony trial. Not because they doubted guilt or innocence, but because they wanted closure. They wanted to see Ruby face consequences. They wanted to see justice for the children. The courtroom became a symbol, a place where betrayal might finally be answered with accountability, reflection. But the trial also raised deeper questions. Would it really change anything? After the Turpin case, after Chris Watts, after so many others, there had been calls for reform. And yet here we were again, with another family, another tragedy, another set of red flags ignored until it was too late. Would Ruby Franke's trial be just another headline, or would it spark real change? Would YouTube adjust its policies? Would lawmakers create protections? Or would the system continue as it always has, reactive instead of proactive? For Ruby Franke, the trial represented the end of her story as an influencer. For her children, it represented the beginning of a long journey of healing. And for the rest of us, it represented a mirror held up to our society, a chance to ask why we keep missing the signs, why we trust appearances, and why we allow systems to fail the most vulnerable again and again. The trial had not even concluded, but already it had left a mark. And no matter the verdict, the bigger question remained. Will we learn from Ruby Franke's story, or will we let history repeat itself? Lessons and broader impact. By the time Ruby Franke sat in a jail cell awaiting trial, the conversation had already shifted. This was no longer just about one family, one mother, or even one influencer. It had become a mirror reflecting something much larger. The way our culture views parenting, the way platforms profit from children's lives, and the way audiences choose what to see and what to ignore. The lessons of Ruby Franke's downfall extend far beyond her suburban home in Utah. They touch every corner of the digital world. Lesson 1. The danger of family vlogging. The Franke case forces us to confront the reality of family vlogging. For more than a decade, YouTube has rewarded parents for turning their children into content. Birthday parties, first days of school, private meltdowns, punishments, everything is fair game when the camera is always rolling. But unlike child actors who are protected by labor laws, Kids in vlogs have no guaranteed income, no working hour restrictions, no protections at all. Their childhood is broadcast for strangers to consume, often without their informed consent. Ruby Franke's arrest highlights the worst-case scenario, a parent using not only their child's life as content, but also their suffering. Clips that once looked like tough love now look like evidence of neglect. And it raises an unsettling question. How many other children are enduring similar experiences, invisible behind the polished thumbnails of other family channels? Lesson 2. Parasocial blindness. Another lesson lies in the psychology of audiences. Ruby didn't hide her strictness. She flaunted it. Yet millions ignored the red flags. Why? Because of parasocial trust. Fans felt like they knew her. They saw her smile, her home, her faith, her children. That illusion of intimacy made them excuse what they might have condemned in a stranger. She must know what's best for her kids. They thought. This kind of blindness is not unique to Ruby's audience. It happens everywhere online. We trust influencers more than institutions, and that trust can be dangerous. Lesson 3. Authority and certainty. Ruby and Jodi spoke with certainty. They didn't suggest, they declared. And people are drawn to certainty. In a confusing world, someone who claims to have all the answers feels comforting. But that certainty can mask harm. Throughout history, abusers, cult leaders, and manipulators have thrived by presenting themselves as unshakable authorities. Ruby was no different. Her confidence convinced many that cruelty was simply discipline. Lesson 4. Platforms and responsibility. The Ruby Franke case also forces us to question the role of platforms like YouTube. Petitions warned about her. Viewers reported her content. And yet, the videos stayed up monetized, promoted by the algorithm. YouTube profited while children were harmed. Should platforms have a duty to intervene sooner when red flags appear? Should they have systems to protect children featured in content? These are uncomfortable questions, but they can no longer be avoided. Lesson 5. Comparisons and context. The lessons become clearer when we compare Ruby's story to others. The Turpin children, trapped in their California home for years, showed us how abuse can flourish in secrecy. Chris What showed us how a smiling family man can conceal horror. Lori Vallow and Chad Daybell showed us how ideology and influence can spiral into tragedy. Ruby's story contains elements of all three: secrecy, deception, and destructive ideology. The broader pattern is undeniable. Appearances are not truth, and unchecked authority can lead to catastrophe. Lesson 6. Audience responsibility. Perhaps the hardest lesson is the one directed at us, the audience. We like to believe we are passive, harmless, just viewers. But every click, every view, every like fuels the system. Ruby's channel thrived not despite criticism, but because of it. Outrage generated engagement. Engagement generated profit. And profit validated her choices. That doesn't make viewers guilty of abuse, but it does mean we are part of the ecosystem that allowed it to grow. If we want to prevent another Ruby Franke, we have to change the way we consume content. Lesson 7. The illusion of the perfect family. At the heart of Ruby's brand was the illusion of perfection. A big family, neat rules, traditional values, smiling children. It was a fantasy of order and wholesomeness. But perfection is often the most dangerous illusion of all. The more perfect a family looks, the more likely we are to overlook the cracks. The more curated the image, the more we ignore our instincts. Ruby's story reminds us that perfection is often a mask, and behind the mask, there may be suffering. The broader impact, the fallout of Ruby Franke's case is already being felt. Lawmakers are discussing protections for children in vlogs. Activists are pushing for stricter oversight. Platforms are under pressure to act. Parents are questioning the ethics of putting their kids online. Viewers are reconsidering their trust in influencers. The impact will ripple for years, perhaps leading to real change or perhaps fading, as outrage so often does. But the choice is ours. We can treat Ruby's story as another scandal to gawk at, another headline to scroll past. Or we can treat it as a turning point, a moment to demand accountability from parents, platforms, and ourselves. Because if we don't, we will see this story again. Another smiling family. Another set of red flags ignored. Another child forced to escape before anyone listens. The lessons of Ruby Franke are clear. The question is, will we learn them? At the end of the day, Ruby Franke's story is not just about one mother's fall from grace. It is about the illusions we choose to believe, the red flags we choose to ignore, and the systems that profit while children suffer. Her children deserve healing, privacy, and safety. And the rest of us must decide, will this case be just another scandal to scroll past, or will it be the wake-up call we finally take seriously? If this story made you reflect, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Your perspective matters, and it helps us all see this case through new eyes. If you found value in this video, please take a moment to like it, share it with others, and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next deep dive into the hidden truths behind the headlines. For those who want to support the channel even more, consider joining as a member. It helps us keep creating longer, more detailed documentaries like this one, and it means you'll get access to exclusive content along the way. And when you're done here, don't stop with this video. Check out the other cases we've covered, stories of family secrets, deception, and tragedy that will leave you questioning just how well we really know the people around us. You'll find links in the description and on screen now. This has been Dark Truth, True Crime Stories. Until next time, stay safe, stay aware, and never stop questioning.